Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Vincent Grandi. I am one of the instructors here at American Dream Real Estate School. Welcome to our course this evening. We are going to start the national portion, and the class will be from 6 to 9 p.m. We'll go over a little bit of some housekeeping tips and answer any questions that you may have before we get started. So I'm going to actually go backwards here. So a couple things we want to cover, a little bit of Zoom classroom etiquette. We want to make sure that we want everybody to participate. Don't feel intimidated if you ask a question. There's no, too many, you can't ask enough questions, and don't ever feel that the question that you're asking may not be, I use the word smart enough, or just not the right question to ask. We want to make sure that you have a really clear understanding this evening of all the material that we're going to cover. It is quite a bit. It is chapters 1 through 5. And so that's going to be covering quite a bit. In this course that we're going to be covering Monday through Saturday. So we go Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, is going to be completed in 4 weeks. So the class that we have tonight, we will have a repeat tomorrow night, and then I will teach a new session on Thursday, and then the other instructor will repeat that again on Saturday, okay? So basically, you're gonna have 2 different sessions per week over a 4-week period. We're gonna start on the national side first, and then once we're completed with the national portion, we'll go right into the state portion. And then when we're all done with the 4-week course, we will have the following week, we will have a kind of like a little study session, a little review for about an hour to answer any questions that you may have that over the coursework that we covered over the last 4 weeks. However, I will give you my personal phone number. You're always welcome to reach out, send me a text, and just say, hey, Vincent, I have a quick question regarding, and whatever your question is, and I will get back to you promptly and get that answered. If it's too long or too complicated to text back and forth, I'm open to jumping on the phone and talking to you either via Zoom or just chatting on the phone. So let's write this number down first. My number is 303-931-5227. So 303-931-5227. And then my personal email is my name. So it's Vincent, Vincent, at Vincent, Vincent, Grandi, Grandi.com. So whatever your easiest way of communicating, just either email or text, and then we'll get your questions answered. Please make sure that your own current cell phones are off or on silent, so that they don't, interrupt or disrupt the class this evening. If you don't have a question and you're just listening to the class, you're listening to myself or other students interacting, if you would keep yourself muted so that any background noise doesn't interact with the other students. As always, as I mentioned prior, it's important that you do ask questions. I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I would love for you to interact and answer the questions back. Again, even if you're just guessing at the question, just try it. Just let's see what your knowledge is, to see what how you retained any study you did prior to the evening's class. And then also too, please make sure that you keep your actual face on the video so that we can see who we're speaking with. Any questions so far? Has anybody had the opportunity to review any of the material that we're going to cover tonight? It's chapters 1 through 5. Just let's show it. Go ahead.
I do have a question. So you did mention that we are covering 1 through 5, but on the website it said to do chapters 1 through 4.
They didn't update that, Vincent.
I can chime in on that. So we are in the process. By the way, my name is Sean. I'm the COO of American Dream Real Estate School. I'm also the one responsible for updating the course. So sometime this week, very soon, once the updated version of the course is ready to go, I'll send an announcement out to everyone, have you all migrate to the new platform where the lesson outline will coincide with the new teaching schedule that you're now a part of, so that there's no confusion as far as, what you should be reading and all that. So just my apologies on that end. It's just difficult to update the current platform and the new one isn't quite ready. So we'll just appreciate a little bit of patience there, and I promise we'll have it all in place. But if you have any complaints, you come to me, you let me know, and I'll talk to myself, scold myself a bit.
Okay, Vincent, can you go over maybe with Anthony? I mean, because I got it last week, but so that he knows that it's 1 through 5, 6 through 10, how the
Yes.
schedule is actually going to go since it's not posted.
Yeah, so I don't know when's the last time you looked on the calendar, because I looked on the calendar just recently, and this evening's class does show 1 through 5.
It says it, but but like Sean said, it's not set up like when you do like the slides that you're going to go through.
Yes.
It's only 1 through 4 still.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah, and I will have 1 through 5 tonight, and then on Thursday I will go 6 through 10.
Okay.
Okay, so so we don't get too far ahead. I'll just kind of announce what the next course will be. So on Thursday it's going to be 6 through 10, and also keep in mind, just here's the main focus and the main goal. The main goal from the school to the students is that we make sure that you have a clear understanding of all the course material. Okay, so I don't want to just rush you through this, and I don't want, I want you to make sure that you understand it, so that once you complete your 168 hours of all your hours of your course work, and you go take your test, and then you take your final exam here at the school, and then we sign off and give you your Rec 33, and you're given the okay to go ahead and take your PSI test, that you pass that, okay? Because you're gonna have the national side and the state side. So that's our main focus. So, we may have a lot of students, and it depends on the number of students that attend each class. As Michelle will, can vouch for this because she's taken other classes with me in the past. If there's, maybe like 1 or 2 students, sometimes it can be like that. We may finish a little bit early, but there are some times when I've had up to like 9, 10 students. And so we may not complete everything because we are asking important questions, and we want to make sure that everybody has a clear understanding of the material that we're going over this evening. So we may carry over a little bit of tonight's lesson into the next one, but we'll always cover everything. So don't panic or worry, gosh, we didn't complete everything this evening. If for some reason it gets too late and we don't get to finish everything, we're just going to pick up where we left off at the next class. But I assure you that we will go through all the course material and be very thorough about it, so that everybody has a clear understanding. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Any questions whatsoever?
I have one. So since we're doing 5, how many hours should we put down for today, as far as the video class goes?
So we will put the full 3 hours this evening.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
Okay.
I would recommend also going into the school library, because we have an abundance. We have a really great library full of videos that the school has put together regarding all the material that I'm going to cover this evening. So all the material that we're going to cover throughout the 4 weeks going forward, there are just a lot of different videos in there that you can use just for maybe referencing, to study with, just to refresh with, or if you have questions, you may even watch a video, and that one of those videos could possibly answer those questions.
Okay.
And watching the videos counts towards your hours of instruction. Okay.
Okay.
All right. All right, let's get started. And then a couple other things I want to talk about is for study tips. Okay, so it's really important that we have really good study habits. It's like being back in school again. And this is a little bit old school, but I'll tell you what, I can assure you this will work for everybody, regardless of the way you retain information. We all study, we all learn, we all have our own ways of how we get through classes. Some people, it's just very, very natural. They can just look at something, listen to a class, take a test, and they get through. Others, it may take 2, 3 times even sometimes, and that's okay to review the material so that you retain it and then you can answer the question. So a really good study method that will really help you is using index cards. And as you are retaining and learning different, you're going to learn a lot of new vocabulary words throughout the course. There's all kinds of acronyms that we use in the industry, terms and concepts, definitions. Write that down on the index card. So you'll put maybe the term on the front of the card, and then on the back you'll put the answer, what that term is, what it means. And then either you can do it with yourself and study every day, or either have a friend or family member just for about 30 minutes per day, just randomly pick the flashcards out and just ask you questions over questions. And if you did that every single day, you will pass the test. I'm telling you, that is like, next to having the book and next to having all the videos, it is one of the best methods, one of the best tools that you can have. And it's really simple. You're just going to write them down yourself. And I would say over the 4 weeks, I've had students that have made like 300 different cards, just depending on the material that you do, whatever you feel. But if it's really important, everything in the course is important, but if there's something that I think that you really need to, make sure that you understand, or any type of the terms and concepts, the definitions that you're not going to be familiar with, this is going to be like almost like a foreign language to you because you've never done this before. Anything that you don't understand or know are the items that I would put on the index cards, and just 3x5 cards, a couple of dollars at the store, and you'll be good to go. Okay. Highlighter. Sometimes, you may want to highlight in the book things that when you want to come back to study. So everything that we're going to cover this evening is out of the book. So you may want to go through the book and start highlighting that. And then we also, I would recommend is reviewing all the definitions in the book and then taking the quizzes in the book. So after you complete the chapters, there's going to be some quizzes. Always take the quizzes and review those as well. And, don't take them, close to each other, because what will happen is you'll start memorizing and then you're not going to retain. You're going to memorize the actual quiz to know the right answer for that particular quiz. So you won't be retaining the actual information. You'll be teaching yourself how to memorize that test, and then that's not going to help you retain it. So if you take a quiz, I would wait at least maybe a couple of days, even maybe a week, and then go retake that same quiz again, so that even though the questions may look familiar to you, you won't, memorize the answers. You'll have to look at it, think, process it through, and then answer the questions. Okay. You should average roughly 20, 25 hours per week, between the classroom and your studying outside the classroom. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is the Modern Real Estate Practice out of the 20th edition. So you should all have that book. So the national side, we actually have the hardcover books. When we get to the state portion, it's going to be the ebooks online.
I didn't receive my books yet.
You have not? Okay. When did you just register for the course recently, or?
Yeah, rather recently. Her
so-
books will probably be arriving by
Yeah, that's
tomorrow
right.
or Wednesday.
Myself is included.
You as well? Okay. No worries. Again, if you get your books later, I wouldn't worry about it too much. There's the class that you can again take tomorrow. And I also plan to have the recording of tonight's class available on the updated platform. So, you can always kind of go back and review the material if you need to.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
All right, so let's all get started. So we're in Unit 1, and we're going to discuss Introduction to the Real Estate Business. So real estate transactions are taking place all around us all the time. It doesn't matter regardless of the market, whether it's an up market, down market, if it's flat, real estate transactions are closing continuously. Sometimes more than others, sometimes less than others, but it's always occurring. The services of mainly highly trained individuals are required. So anywhere from attorneys to title insurance companies, agents, surveyors, tax experts. There's just an abundance of different participants in the transaction. All these people, in addition to your buyers, your sellers, landlords, and tenants, because not only do we buy and sell, but we also do leasing. So to do leasing, you are required to have a real estate license as well. And it also depends on your skill and knowledge of a licensed real estate professional. So there's a variety of different pieces to this, and there's a lot of different participants in this. Now, we in Colorado are not an attorney state, so you'll see the term attorney used quite often on the national side. We are a title state only, so our title company handles everything. They're the escrow, they handle the title, they handle the legal, the recording, everything. But there are some states where perhaps an attorney may handle the transaction, and or it may be divided up between title and escrow. So on the national side, you'll have attorneys, you'll have the title insurance company, and you'll have an escrow company. And I'll point out as we go through the difference between Colorado and the national side. I don't want to confuse you, but there are some pertinent information that I do want to kind of explain so that you don't get confused, because once we get to the Colorado portion of the course, you'll start seeing things that we talked about on the national side, which is completely opposite of what we do in Colorado. So I'll always make sure that I point that out to you. For test purposes, because this question gets answered a lot, well, how can I tell the difference if I'm on the national side or the Colorado side, if there are things that we do different from national versus the state side? You will, when you take your test, you will take all your questions on the national portion first. Once you complete the national portion, then they'll move you over to the state portion. So you'll know exactly when you're being asked these questions, whether you're on the national side or the state side, in order to answer the question correctly based on the jurisdiction. So our learning objectives this evening is to list and describe the various careers that are available in the real estate industry, list the different classifications and characteristics of real property, and also describe the types of housing available for purchase or to rent. Explain the factors of supply and demand in the real estate market and financial considerations for a home buyer. Identify the advantages and disadvantages of investing in real estate, and describe the objective and financial concepts involved in the investment process. So in real estate, a business of many specializations, we have the brokerage, we have the appraiser, we have property management, we have financing, the individual who does the lending, subdivision and development, home inspection, counseling, and education. So let's break those down a little bit. So the broker is the entity that the individual licensee will be working under. So our very first 2 years that we are licensed in the state of Colorado, we must be what we call highly supervised. Once we get past the 2-year mark, then if we want to, we can break off from that brokerage and just be our own individual entity and work by ourselves. But under the very first 2 years, it is it's a requirement that the individual licensee is closely supervised, and the brokerage is there to answer questions. Now, the brokerage is there to answer questions regardless whether you're in business for a year or you're in business for 30 years. I mean, I'm not on my own. I work for a brokerage, and I've been doing this for quite a while. I work for a brokerage. I do have my employing broker license, so I teach, but I still ask questions. I still go to my managing broker and say, hey, I've got a question on a contract, or hey, something just came across this transaction that I'm working on. And sometimes when we're talking to our managing brokers, when we're talking to our supervisory positions, we sometimes kind of know that answer, but it's a process of just kind of walking through that to make sure that the way we see it is really the way that they see it, and that just to kind of get verification, and to make sure that what we're saying is. But there are some times that we definitely have to ask questions, and during those first 2 years, it's imperative that you're teamed up with a brokerage that's going to be there, giving you the education, the training, the support. So when you're writing your very first offer, that close supervision means that they're going to sit with you and help you write that offer. You're not going to be expected after you pass your test just to go out and write an offer. With your neighbor says, hey, you've got your license now. we want to buy a home. There's a house down the street. That's the house we want to put an offer on. Can you write an offer on? And, you know, this is all new. We'll be like deer in headlights. That's where we go to our managing broker, employing broker, and he or she then will sit down and walk you through that. Okay. You go through the entire process. They're going to help you answer all those questions and walk you through that transaction so that, you know, it's a smooth transaction. And then at the very end, they're going to, you know, go to the closing with you. They're going to sit with you at that closing because there is a process. Once we get to the closing, we're not really done with. We still have some things that we have to accomplish at the actual closing. And there's some documents, some forms that, you know, you as the licensee that's going to be working with the buyer and or the seller will have to complete and fill out. So it's imperative that they are with you, supervisory, and making sure that you have, you know, a clear understanding of that process. And I would say on average, probably about 2 to 3 transactions. Once you get through that, you're going to really catch on fairly quickly, and then it's going to kind of come natural. But again, you'll always be asking questions. You're always going to learn something new at every transaction. I mean, I don't want to be like a know-it-all, but I feel like I'm very experienced, and I feel like I know what I'm doing. But I can tell you what, every time I get done with a closing, I always look back at it and I reflect and I'll say, gee, I just learned something, or I know I'll never do that again, because you're constantly learning in this business, and things are always changing as well in our business. I think that's what's so interesting. It's never boring. I mean, we just, things are always changing, whether it's the laws or education, contracts, the way we market, just, you know, I mean, just the economy, the environment, things are just always changing. So there's never really a dull moment in our industry. So that kind of covers up the brokerage and the responsibilities and what the brokerage is going to do. Now we have an appraisal. An appraisal is is basically for the lender. It's not really for the buyer and the buyer's decision to say, I'm going to have an appraisal completed based on the home that I want to purchase. Because when a buyer puts an offer on a property, the dollar amount that they submit on that contract, to them, that's the value of the home. So they don't really need to get an appraisal. They've already, in their mind, they've already made that decision. Hey, I'm putting an offer in for this dollar amount. Therefore, in my world, I feel that's what the home is worth. The appraisal is merely a tool for the lender to make sure that they have a clear understanding what that home is worth, or that unit or that building or whatever the situation that we're selling is worth, because they always have to go into it looking at it in a different perspective. The homeowner goes into it thinking, I'm going to purchase this home, I'm going to invest, I'm going to live in it for a while, I may raise my family, I may turn it into an investment property, it may have some residual income, whatever the case may be. The lender has one and only one piece to this, is they look at it that they may own this home someday, that they may, because the homeowner may no longer be making the payments. So the risk of it, they have to look at it, and they have to make sure they have a clear understanding of what the value of that home is. So that's the appraisal process. It's merely a tool for the lender to cross their T's, dot their I's, make sure that they have a really clear understanding what this home is valued at and the amount that they want to lend on based on the qualifications of that buyer. You may want to get into property management. Property management is another piece of the puzzle in our industry that does require to have a real estate license. I can say, in all honesty, it is one piece of the puzzle that I have really personally for myself have no interest in it. It is a lot of work, and it is hard work, and there's a high risk to it as well. So, but there a lot of people want to get into it. There are probably people in class this evening that want to, become property managers. It's a great business to be in, but it really takes a special individual to do that. I think out of all the things that we can do in our business, property management, it takes a certain individual to do that. So you do have to be licensed, and you will more than likely, if you're going to be a property management, you're going to more than likely work for a company that primarily focuses on property management. Most residential brokerages do not allow their licensee, their agents, their brokers in their office to be property managers because of the high risk that's involved. There's a lot of money being passed back and forth. We're going to talk more about this as we move forward in the class over the next 4 weeks. There's bank accounts, there's trust accounts. There's just a lot of moving parts to it, and it can be fairly risky. So on a whole, most brokerages do not allow their individual agents to be property management. They may have property management, but they may have like a separate section or a separate entity within the brokerage that handles that. But on a whole, they don't allow just the individual who's out on the floor to manage properties. And then we have financing. Financing is the tool that the buyer will use in order to secure the money to purchase the real property that they're going to buy. So there's always a lender involved. If it's not going to be a cash transaction, then there's going to be a lender involved. So we'll be talking a lot about financing, how financing works through the transaction, and going through that piece of the puzzle as well. And then we also have subdivision and development. So there's different entities that you'll be familiar with, whether it's through the city, county, or even state, any type of local municipalities, that you'll be getting a clear understanding regarding zoning and perhaps maybe special financing. There's just a variety of different areas that we'll be covering that as well. And then through the process, we will have a home inspection done on a home. Now, in Colorado, and I would say most states, but in Colorado, homes are sold legally as is. Okay, so there's a little bit of a misconception regarding the home inspection process and how that all works. It is a right for the buyer to conduct a home inspection. However, it is not a right or a requirement for the seller to make any repairs and or corrections to the home. So there's a little bit of, I think, as time has gone on, people may have gotten carried away with the inspection process, but legally in our contracts, homes are sold as is. So when we bring our buyer into the home and we show the property to them, what they see basically is what they're going to get legally. Now, when we have the actual contract, and just kind of walk you through how this would all work, is that the buyer does have that ability to conduct an inspection, but there's no obligation for the seller to make any repairs that the buyer may request. Even if the lender is going to require it, at the end of the day, the seller really makes the call. If a lender says, hey, in order to get this loan closed, because it's a FHA or it's a VA type loan, and we have a broken window that's considered health and safety, we're going to require to get it fixed. The seller, legally has no obligation to do anything. Now, obviously, if they don't, that could either hold up or actually, terminate the transaction to where that buyer would have to go elsewhere, and now the home would have to go back on the market. So, and that's where our professional part comes in, where we, want to coach, consult, educate our clients on, what we recommend that they do. So again, the home inspection process, we're going to learn more about that as we move forward, but it is for the transaction. And then counseling, it's really imperative that, especially for a first-time home buyer, that we guide them and get them educated so they have a clear understanding on the financial portion of it, or perhaps maybe the type of home that they're going to be buying. So there are some programs, there are some loan programs, some grant programs for down payment assistance, just a variety of some certain homes that we sell. Affordable housing would be one. So there are certain either loans or types of homes or government programs that a buyer may be taking part in that would have to have some type of counseling or education, whether it's a first-time home buyer's course or down payment assistance course. There's a variety of different ones, but we want to make sure, because it is probably, the biggest, the largest asset that the average, American is ever going to purchase. And it's really important that they have a really clear understanding and they understand the day-to-day, process all the way till we get to the closing. We don't want to just throw them in, car, show them a house, have them write a contract, and have them show up on the closing day and not have a clear understanding of what they're doing. So it's really imperative that they process through. It really takes an entire team to get this transaction closed. It takes both sides of the transaction. It takes the buyer, it takes the seller, it takes the lender, the home inspector, the appraiser, both the agent that is representing the buyer, the agent that's representing the seller. It really takes everybody to work together as a team to get the transaction closed. And so it's really imperative, because we, as the buyer's agent or the seller's agent, it's really important that, we walk them through that path and we make sure that they have a clear understanding of what they're doing, what they're getting themselves into, and that they understand everything from start to finish. Education falls under that counseling piece as well. So there are many times, as I mentioned, that there are certain programs, depending on the home and or the loan that the individual is going to participate in, is that they do have some type of education classes. A lot of times when we're doing like grant programs, there may be down payment assistance programs that they don't have to pay back. There are programs out there where people were getting $15,000 gifted to them for down payment assistance, or perhaps maybe the county or the jurisdiction municipality that the home is located in may have some type of closing cost assistance, or either down payment and or any other finances that can be covered in that. So again, counseling education covers all that. Any questions? And always feel free to just jump in if you do have questions, if I'm going too fast or you don't understand something or you want to get clarity on it. Okay, so the types of real property because we really only have one license that falls under. We're not going to do everything, but our license does cover residential, commercial, mixed use, industrial, agricultural, and then special purpose. Special purpose would be considered like commercial. Special purpose could be like churches and schools and community centers. Those would be examples. And that again would kind of fall under the commercial side of it. So with residential property, we have a lot of advantages and we have a lot of disadvantages of home ownership. The advantages of owning in residential property would be financial stability and long-term appreciation. So it's an investment, it's long-term. It's not like the stock market where if we bought something today, we're going to see, an incredible amount. I mean, the market the way it is today, I will say, is a little bit rare, and there are cases where we are seeing, increases in the values of our homes in a very, very fast time. But on a whole, normally, it is more of a long-term. So, and when I say that, even with today's market, the way things are appreciating so fast, people don't buy and sell. Like you don't buy a home today and then in 2 days, 2 days later, you go and sell like you would stock. We can go online, we can go to our stock brokerage, we can purchase some stock, and maybe 3 or 4 days later, we may buy more, we may sell some of it. It all depends. But in the real estate portion of it, we don't have turnover that quick. It's more long-term, 6 months, a year, sometimes a lot longer under normal conditions. There's also advantages of renting a home, though. Owning a home may not be the right time for that individual. One is, I would say right now, not so much, but in many cases, it could be more affordable to rent a home. The way rates are, the prices of homes, and the ability to borrow money at a very, very low rate kind of contradicts this as far as affordability, because it's probably a little bit more affordable to actually own a home than it is to rent. However, that is just the actual cost base to actually make your mortgage payment and or rent. But with homeownership, there are always going to be ongoing costs. Things break down, we have to replace, we have to update, we have to, maintain, upkeep, maintenance. So that tied in with the actual cost of owning a home could make it much more affordable to rent, because we just, we write one check to rent, and if something breaks, if something needs to be replaced, repaired, whatever the situation may be, we just dial the number up, call the landlord, and ask them to come out and take care of it. If you own the home, you're going to have to, either call a contractor, repairing person, and or do it yourself. Regardless, it's going to cost money to do all that. And then owning, renting versus owning, you do have more flexibility because you can come and go more. If you're renting, if you decide you don't want to live there anymore, you can basically just pick up and go and move somewhere else. Whereas if you own a home, you don't have that flexibility. You don't have that ability to just pick up and leave. You have to go through the process, if you needed to leave, to actually dispose of that property by selling it. And then, along with renting, there are amenities that, come with renting that you don't have to pay for. So there may be a built-in swimming pool, for example, a spa, there may be, tennis, there may be trails, there may be, regardless of the type of development that you're living in, all that is part of your rent. And those are things that you don't have to actually pay if you were owning a home. So there are advantages and there are disadvantages of owning a home. I would say other advantages of owning a home is that you have the ability for tax write-offs. And I'm going to start right out, and I'll repeat this all the time, is that when we talk about taxes and we talk about legal issues, always remember that we are not tax advisors, and nor are we attorneys. So we never give tax advice and we never give legal advice. If we explain these terms to our clients and they still don't understand or can't make a decision on what they need to do, then we would refer them to the appropriate individual, whether it's a tax advisor and or an attorney. So with residential property, there are tax advantages. We do have the ability to write off certain things, such as interest on the mortgage, property taxes. If it's an investment property is considered like a business. So you could actually write off, if you have a property manager that's managing the property, HOA, anytime you make any type of repairs to the home, an investment property, all those are write-offs based on your own situation with your taxes. So there are a lot of advantages. If you're renting, the money that you pay out to the landlord is just money that you're just basically getting rid of. I mean, you have nothing to show for on that. You don't gain any type of equity in the home that you're renting. It doesn't increase in value. There's no return. You're just writing a check every month, sending it out to somebody else who's making their mortgage, who's probably earning money off of you. So those are the advantages and disadvantages of residential property. And the different types of housing on business, we have single family detached houses, we have apartment buildings, we have condominiums, we have co-ops, planned unit developments, mixed use developments, converted use properties, and factory built housing. So single family detached house would be a single home that is not connected on all four corners. An apartment building would be more of an investment property, and there would be multiple units. Condominium is the legal description of that property. So the individual who owns a condominium, it's like an apartment. However, they do have ownership in it. They own inside the four walls of the unit. They don't own any of the airspace and outside the four walls and or the common areas. A co-op, does anybody know what a co-op is? Have you ever heard what a co-op is? We don't have a lot of co-ops in Colorado. Gosh, I think I know of maybe one or two in Denver where there are co-ops, but it's very, very rare, and you more than likely would probably never come across it because they're so very far and few between. But there are other areas. One of the largest places in the country would be New York City. New York City, it's very common to have co-ops, and co-ops, it's a different form of owning. You don't actually own your individual unit. You actually own stock in the building, and there's a cumulative amount of homeowners that all live in this building that own stock in the building, therefore giving them legal ownership where they live. But it's very, very different when you want to go sell. You need to basically get permission. They need to vote in the building. If you want to rent out your unit, you don't have the ability just to go ahead and rent like you would normally under the home that you owned. There's a quorum that they would have to conduct, have a vote, and they would be able to say yes or no on whether you're going to rent your unit out. And most of them have probably very strict terms to where, you know, if you were going to rent it out, you can't rent it out, you know, more than 2 years or 3 years or whatever the case is. But you don't have a lot of personal say in a co-op like you would in your own home that you owned and or condominium townhouse. Plan unit developments, those are communities, large areas of developments where there's going to be a lot of parks and recreation, HOAs. They're a large development. Central Park in Denver would be considered kind of like a plan unit development. Green Valley Ranch would be another one that could be considered like a plan unit development. We don't have a lot in the Denver metro area. There are some areas throughout the country that have more than others. Even though we have these large developments in Colorado, we don't have a lot of plan unit developments. Factory built housing, those are going to be our manufactured housing. Probably heard the terms mobile homes, you know, from years ago, but we don't really make mobile homes anymore. Factory built housing can be manufactured type homes, but there are also single family homes that actually build the homes in pieces and then have them delivered and then they're assembled. I'll give an example. I don't know if everybody's here in class is in the Denver metro area, but there was a development that was put in South Aurora, gosh, maybe 15 years ago or so. And you drive through this neighborhood, it's like any other neighborhood with single family homes. However, they did not send in contractors to lay down the foundation, lay down the concrete, and then start framing, you know, the homes and then finishing the homes off and putting the roofs on. They actually, these homes, and there's probably maybe 300 to 400 of these homes in this one little community, and they're all over. I'm just giving this as an example. This one location in South Aurora, and they actually came in with actual, you know, pieces of the home, you know, maybe 8-10 different pieces, and they were assembled together and built that way. So that would be another way of calling it factory built housing. So I think when people think factory built housing, they think right away, you know, a mobile home or even, you know, a manufacturer type style home, but it also can be a regular, what we would call like a stick built type home, but they are factory built to where nothing is actually built on site. It's all carried in from off site, and it can be anywhere from, you know, the entire side of a home to the pitch of the roof, to, you know, maybe half of the back end of the house. It all depends on how they're built, but they come in very, very large pieces, and they're all assembled in a factory, delivered to the site, and they are basically assembled kind of like a Lego house. So let's get into fair housing, and this is something that I, you know, really emphasize a lot in my class. It's really important that we all have a really clear understanding on fair housing. You know, my own personal opinion, and I mean, it falls under fair housing, but everybody and anybody in our country should have the right to live where they want to live, purchase a home if they qualify to purchase the home. If they want to rent, they should be able to rent. We should not have to ever worry about any type of fair housing, but unfortunately we do in our business. And we will come across different situations to where individuals are not practicing fair housing. So it's imperative that as professionals that we always make sure that we are conducting and following fair housing. Even if we are not participating in the action, if we are aware of it or we know that it's happening and we don't report it, we are just as guilty as if we were the perpetrators and causing a fair housing issue. So that would be an example of, you know, what does my managing broker do for me? That would be an example. Even if you're unsure, you know, you may be unsure, you may know for sure that it's happening, whatever the case is, you would always want to pick up that phone and call he or she and say, hey, I think this individual may be, you know, causing fair housing, and you know it needs to be conducted. And no commission check in the world, I don't care the dollar amount, is going to ever be worth violating fair housing. So there are times when we may have to just walk away from the business, and that's good, because we need to stand up and we need to make sure that we protect the consumer and that they all have the ability, whether they're going to buy or rent, the ability to live where they want to live and not ever feel like they're discriminated or that they can't either purchase and or rent in that community. So there's going to be federal laws that we're going to talk about, and there's going to be state laws. State laws will be when we get to the state portion. So everybody has to follow fair housing, regardless. All 50 states and the territories of the US, we all have to follow this fair housing law. However, states do have the ability to have added on protection. Colorado happens to be one of those states where not only do we follow federal law, but we also have additional protected classes within our state. And we'll talk about that when we get to the state portion. I don't want to confuse everybody, but for fair housing, federal law prohibits discrimination in the provision of housing and housing related services, such as lending based on an individual's race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, or disability. So at any time whatsoever, if somebody wants to purchase a home, we cannot ever use this type of discrimination. If somebody wants to apply for a loan to get financing for a home, regardless of the home, regardless of where the home is at, the lender cannot, they must follow federal law. And they cannot, they cannot discriminate. If somebody wants to rent, again, federal law prohibits discrimination. So familial status would be, because that gets asked a lot, like, what does familial status mean? So familial status means that if an individual is either married or not married, a single parent, or, regardless of the number of, say, children that he or she may have, cannot be discriminated to either purchase and or rent. If somebody is disabled, we cannot discriminate against somebody that's disabled. We have to make reasonable accommodations. I use the example, we can't be forced to rebuild a house, but if a disabled person comes in and says, hey, I'd like to rent, this unit, and I'm in a wheelchair, and or I need, I can't climb up and down those 2 or 3 stairs, then we would have to make, reasonable accommodations, which would be like perhaps maybe a ramp, or maybe, handbars to help them walk up and walk down. We may have to widen, the entrance ways into like the bathrooms of the home, and or maybe a bedroom. So things that are reasonable, but we must do that. If somebody was to become disabled once they already are living in that property, so if they're renting and something catastrophic happens to them, they become disabled, then that landlord, that owner of that unit or the property that they live in, would have to provide reasonable accommodations for them. So they may have to install something later. They may have to come in and they may have to make some type of changes or accommodations. The disabled person also can make their own accommodations and then just change them out when they leave. And again, the rest is fairly explanatory, but again, you want to go over it. Race, color, national origin, doesn't matter where they come from. Our country is a country of immigrants. So there should be no question as to where anybody comes from when they want to buy a house. Religion, none of that pertains to anything. But here's where fair housing gets a little tricky with people, because if a seller is, the minute a licensee is part of the transaction, fair housing kicks in. Now, an individual homeowner, as unfair or discriminatory as it may sound, an individual who's going to rent out their own personal home, an individual who's going to sell their own home on their own, Craigslist, they put an ad on Facebook, whatever, they unfortunately can discriminate by themselves. They can, they don't have to give reason, they can, but the minute a licensee, and this is important for test purposes, the minute a licensee is part of the transaction, fair housing discrimination kicks in, and at no time can anybody ever participate in any type of violations for that. So that's going to be a test question. The difference between an individual consumer doing it on their own versus an individual who is participating with the licensee. So anytime a national lender, a bank, and or a licensee, a realtor, is involved in the transaction, the fair housing falls into place. If neither of those are part of the transaction and somebody just happens to sell their house, they could, and or rent their home out, they could literally, unfortunately, discriminate for any of these reasons here. Any questions regarding fair housing? So just make sure, go ahead.
I do, sorry. So you mentioned before, like with the disability thing, if somebody had a wheelchair and they were renting a home, either the renter or the owner of the home has to make the accommodation. You also mentioned earlier that the homeowner is not legally responsible to do any of that. So does that there's a little bit of a gray area, I guess, when it comes to that?
Well, they are, so yes, they do have to accommodate. They have to give reasonable accommodate. So I'm not sure, let me rephrase this, make sure I answered your question. So if somebody is living in a rental and they become disabled, the landlord should give them reasonable accommodations. They should make those changes for them. Now, they can't say, well, you're on the second story, you're on the second floor, and we don't have any first floor units, so we'll have to build another, add on or something to the building, so that there's, that would be not, unfortunately, would be, unreasonable. But reasonable would be making accommodations for them to be able to get in and out of the unit, be able to, walk through the front door, either through a wheelchair. Maybe again, put guardrails up, put handrails in the bathrooms, hallways, maybe, the stairwell, whatever the case is. Those type of accommodations they have to do. Yeah.
Okay.
Did that answer your question, or?
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Okay. So again, here's a great one for your index cards. What am I doing here? Sorry. Is, fair housing, write down all the areas for fair housing, because you basically have to memorize this, because this will be on the test. They may have all these and they may throw another one in. So everything is multiple choice on the test. So you may see something else that's thrown in there that could offset it. So, and confuse you, because you just see it and think, well, that looks like it might be discriminatory. So I'll just consider that to be it. But this is the area for federal. Okay, so supply and demand, right? Everybody's pretty familiar with the way supply and demand goes. If we don't have a very large supply of widgets, things that we're going to sell, but we have a line out the door, people wanting to purchase these little widgets, more than likely that store owner is going to say, well, you know what? I'm going to increase my prices. I mean, I think a really good example would be Uber. Everybody's done Uber or Lyft, right? So there's supply and demand right there, right? If there's a special event, if there's a concert, or if there's a sporting event, or maybe it's a holiday, or a special like New Year's Eve, supply and demand is huge during those events, right? And Lyft and Uber have made it so that their algorithms know when this supply and demand is going to go up and go down, and their fees will change, right? If I call Uber right now and I go somewhere, I mean, I live in Denver, right? So if I was to take an Uber to downtown Denver, and it's Monday, I'll just throw a number up. We'll say $15, okay? Now, and it's 7, 8 o'clock at night on a Monday, probably just a regular Monday normal type evening. But if I was to use Uber Friday night at 10 o'clock and go downtown, the cost of that Uber ride is going to probably be $20, $25, maybe even $30. Who knows? Maybe there's something going on near there that I have nothing to do with, but because it's an event in that area, the demand is so high and they only have so many Uber drivers out there, right, that the price is going to go up. Maybe it can go up to $40. So housing's the same way. Supply and demand works the same way. If we have low supply and high demand, our prices are gonna go up. When the supplies increase, when we have an abundance of homes that are available, and we don't have that many people looking for a home, the prices are going to go down. So right now we are in the supply and demand where the demand is very high. Everybody coming either through COVID because of a lot of variety of different reasons. People were moving around the country a lot. They didn't have to work in their offices. They could work from home. So they're thinking, well, gosh, why should I live in this part of the country? I've always wanted to live over there, but there was no jobs there. But now I have a job because I'm working from my home. I can now move, 1,000 miles away to where I really want to live. And so that caused the shift in the market over the last year. There's always reasons for shifts, but that was one of the biggest reasons why the demand was so high, is people had the ability to basically live wherever they wanted to live during COVID. So we saw a lot of changes. So as the demand was going up, we did not have a lot of people selling. We did not have enough people to meet the demands of all the people who wanted to buy. So that just was escalating prices to continue to go up, and it's still happening. Now, we may have areas in say during issues with the economy. Let's just say a large company shuts down in a small town. We have a town of 50,000 people, and we have the number one employer in the town decides to close down, pack up, and move out of the country, or maybe go, to another state where maybe it's not as expensive to operate. Now we're going to have people who are going to probably be needing to leave and find jobs elsewhere because it's a small town. There's not a lot of jobs. And this was a large employer. They have taken the jobs and gone elsewhere. So now we have this large pool of people who are out looking for jobs. More than likely, they're going to have to relocate, right? So the demand is going to go the opposite. That there's not going to be a demand. We're going to have a higher supply. People are either vacating, moving out, walking away, whatever the case is. So we're going to have a large supply of units available, which is now going to cause the prices to go down because the sellers are going to be motivated to sell their property, and they may start doing price reductions because they're competing with 15, 20 other homes in their neighborhood, and they want to make sure they get their house sold. So they're offering incentives, they're reducing their prices. So as that occurs, the prices continue to decrease. So the demand is low, the supply is high, the prices go down. Any
I have a
questions?
question.
Mhm.
Yes, I have two questions.
Okay.
I know you stated you live in Denver. Are we able to get like an international license?
No. So there's no international license. So um, every state requires you to be licensed in that state in order to sell real estate in that state.
Yeah.
However, you can refer business out and get a referral fee anywhere really in the world.
Oh,
So if you are in, that's why you always want to be talking, for business purposes, for marketing, you always want to let people know that, you sell real estate. So if your neighbor says, oh, we'd like you to sell our home, we're relocating, we're moving to Montana, we've got a job transfer. Great. Well, more than happy to help you get your home sold. And by the way, do you have a realtor in Montana? And they'll say, no, we're going to go next weekend and start doing our search. Well, I network with a variety of different realtors throughout the country, and can I connect you to somebody, and then you can talk to them, make sure that's a good fit. In fact, let me give you 2 or 3 different people, but these are people that I trust and have confidence with, and I would definitely refer myself to them. So I would like to pass your name on to them. And then there's pretty much a standard referral fee. I mean, everything is negotiable, but standard referral fee would be 25%. So you refer business to that individual, and that individual would pay you 25% of their commission that they got from the sale. So yeah, you have to be licensed in whatever state that you're working in, but you could actually get a referral fee if with an agent in Mexico City. You can get a referral fee from somebody in London, when you're talking international, that if you have international clients that are going to be moving in and moving out. So
okay.
That's part of marketing and connecting and networking with agents throughout the country, so that when you do have clients that do relocate, as many do now, you can refer them out. And then it's a partnership, so that when they have people moving into Colorado, you want to make sure that they're referring them to you, so that you get the business and then pay them a referral fee.
Thank you. And the last question, do y'all do pre-foreclosures?
Do we do what now?
Pre-foreclosures. Like foreclosure, there's like pre-foreclosure before you sell. So you try to convince the owner to sell to you. You know what I mean? It's called pre-foreclosure before it go all the way in foreclosure.
You mean you the agent to buy it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are. We're going to get. We'll talk about that piece, but if you're going to, there's certain rules and laws and regulations that protect the consumer from a licensed realtor purchasing their home in those situations, and so we'll talk more about that.
Okay.
Okay. If you're going to be buying your client's property, how and when that would be appropriate. So we're going to talk more about that in another session. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Vince,
Okay,
I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Speaking of referral fees, is that just a verbal agreement, or is there?
No, everything is in writing.
Okay.
One thing in this industry is you do everything in writing. We don't, honestly, it doesn't matter who you're working with, and it has just nothing to do just with referrals, but when you're, agreeing to repair something or fix something or whatever the case is, there's an abundance of reasons as to why we would communicate and agree and not agree to something between two people. Always have everything in writing in this business. And that doesn't matter who you're working with. Oh, I trust that person. I've known that person since the first grade. That person would, I'd give them my left kidney. It doesn't matter who, what, when, or where. Everything needs to be put in writing because it's a paper trail. Because when something does happen, you will have that little piece of paper to back up as to, you know, who said and who agreed to do what. And it's just, and it's just part of the transaction. Everything has to be in writing because we have to take our personal relationships out of the transaction.
Question. Okay.
And we have to be professional at all times because we have a fiduciary duty to take care of our clients.
Okay.
So, and again, too, you know, you'll know that everything needs to be in writing because if something was ever to be investigated 2, 3, 4 years later, we have all the documentation that we need to provide whoever needs it to investigate whatever the matter may be, whether it's good or bad. You know, just because somebody's investigating doesn't mean it's bad, but we want to make, you know, you want to make sure that, you know, every I is dotted, every T is crossed. Okay. So characteristics of real estate as a commodity is its uniqueness and its immobility. Factors that affect supply. So this could affect, we talked a little bit about this prior, is that perhaps like the labor force. A company is shutting down, but it could be vice versa. If you remember a couple of years ago, Amazon was searching for a second location for a second corporate headquarters. They have their world headquarters in Seattle. And because they're so large, so global that they were looking for not only just other office sites, but they actually were going to open up a second world headquarters. Denver was on that short list to look at, okay? So if they were going to bring their corporate headquarters to Denver, could you imagine what the supply and demand would have been then? The amount of people that they were going to move in, they were going to be moving in thousands of people. You know, we don't have enough homes to handle for our local residents that we have right now. And if we were to bring in 2,500 more people that were going to be buying houses, because these are all high paying jobs. These aren't minimum wage type jobs. These were going to be all, you know, high paying type jobs. And more than likely, not all of them, but let's just say if 80% of them came in to buy a home, what that would have done to the supply and demand. Same thing goes with, you know, in a small town. You know, if Amazon was to open up a little warehouse, you know, in southern Colorado, you know, that would affect the supply and the demand because it's going to have growth. It's going to bring in prosperity. It's going to bring in jobs. It's going to bring in money. And then it's a domino effect. You know, not only is that group of people that come in and move in and need to buy houses, they need to buy cars, and then the amount of money that is being passed around starts, you know, the wealth starts increasing with, you know, the surrounding areas. So it changes everything. So labor force can be positive, labor force can be negative. Again, if they're going to shut down a large military base, that affects the labor force because that hurts the economy. There's a lot of jobs that would be affected by that, and that would cause supply and demand. Construction and material costs, a perfect example right now. As we are, you know, exiting COVID, you know, lumber has skyrocketed, you know, 300, 400, 500, 600% in some cases. Material costs, because international borders have been closed for well over a year. There are ships with containers sitting in the middle of the Pacific Ocean from China to California that have all kinds of materials on there that could not be sent over because the borders were closed, and therefore we were not shipping, you know, certain materials. So there's, you know, you want to go buy, for an example, you know, appliances. It's a big shortage of appliances right now because a lot of them are made overseas. And if you want to, you know, typically before COVID, if you wanted to go buy a dishwasher, you could literally walk into Lowe's, pay for a dishwasher and have it delivered to your house within 48 hours. You may wait 6 months now for that same dishwasher. And the price of that, as you can see, is increasing. There's a shortage of used cars right now. These are just examples. I just want to give you examples so you have a clear understanding of the supply and demand. But there's a shortage of used cars right now. Used cars have increased, I think, what, 25, 30% over the last 12 months because the demand is there, but the supply is not. And then, of course, governmental controls and monetary policy will also cover, and affect the supply and demand, because if interest rates like they are now stay low, it's very cost effective for someone to borrow money and be able to purchase a home. If interest rates increase, that brings down the qualification of what an individual can borrow based on their income. So the supply and the demand can be affected that way as well, because if interest rates increase, people can only borrow so much money. They may not be able to afford to buy a home anymore in Denver, for example, if the rates start to increase, because they can only buy. But if rates are decreasing or they're remaining low as they are now, it gives the individual the ability to purchase more of a home. So if the interest rate is at 3% and it jumps to 4%, that's going to change what they can buy, the supply and the demand. Other factors are populations, demographics, and employment and wage levels. So population, if the population is decreasing and or increasing, there are some areas, here in Colorado where our population decreases, small towns, people they graduate from high school, they go away to college and they don't come back because there's really not a lot there. It's a smaller town. But they may come to, like, say, areas like Denver, Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, where there's maybe more opportunities, and that's going to increase the population, which is going to affect the demand, supply and demand. Demographics. There are some areas where maybe, as the population ages, there's no turnover. People may be aging and they're not having, maybe their families aren't growing. And so the demographics change and the supply and demand could change. And then employment and wage levels. If we have low employment and we have income coming in, people are going to be buying. The demand's going to be there. But if people don't have employment, they lose their jobs and or their wages are low, that's also going to affect the supply and demand, because they may not be able to qualify, if they're going to purchase something, to qualify for the amount that they need in order to live in that geographical area. And that's what's happening in Colorado right now. Colorado is, our wages are not staying in line with the cost of living. So we see more people now. We don't have a mass exodus, but we do see people leave now more than they did before, because the wages are not keeping up with the cost of living. And that's in many large metropolitan areas where the wages just are not increasing with the cost of living. Therefore, the supply and the demand can be affected. It's not happening really in Colorado right now, but it could at some point. If something was to really shift, it could cause the supply and the demand to go the other way. So financial considerations for the homeowner is property appreciation. Our properties appreciate, and we get equity in the property, which means money in our pocket if we were able to sell it. Build-up of owner's equity as loan payments are made. So as we pay down, we make a mortgage payment every month. As we make our payment, so much goes towards interest to the bank, and so much goes back to us to pay down on the loan balance. So as the loan balance decreases and the values of our homes increase, we're going to have more equity. And then when we go to sell it, we're going to make a profit. We're going to make money. As we stated before as well earlier, tax deductions on mortgage interest and property taxes. And then there's also the exclusion from capital gain taxes on the profit of a sale. So again, we're not tax advisors. We're not going to get into, giving tax advice. If you're single, if you're married, if you bought a home and sold within the last 2 years, 10 years, it was a rental, it was a vacation home, you raised your family in it, but we don't want to get into giving any type of tax advice. But there are issues with owning a home that you may or may not have capital gains. And again, that's something that we would pass on to our tax advisor. But the main focus here is to understand that can or cannot happen. All right, getting into real property and law. So though real estate can never change its location, meaning we can't pick up the house and move it somewhere else. We can't take that entire complex, that condominium complex, and move it down a half a block near the park, or closer to the highway. It's permanent. Real property stays. It does not. It's immobile. It is a product that has a market in which a variety of transactions take place. The real estate professional brings the parties together for sale. We're going to buy and sell. We're going to lease, exchange, or other transactions. The real estate professional needs to know enough about the product to be able to educate and guide clients and customers, whether they are buyers, sellers, renters, landlords, or investors. So we'll be given all types of recommendations and advice. We just never tell people what they should do. We'll always give them, advice. We'll always explain to them the process and go through all that, but we won't ever tell them this is what you need to do. We let them make that decision themselves. So go down to the next one. Our learning objectives will be discuss the concepts of land and ownership rights in real property. Distinguish real and personal property. So we have two. We're going to talk about the difference between real property and personal property and how it's transferred. Explain the basic economic and physical characteristics of real property, and discuss the limitations of the real estate professional under the law. So let's talk about land. So land is defined as the Earth's surface extending downward to the center of the Earth and upward to infinity. Physical characteristics are its immobility. So again, you can't just pick it up and move it around. The indestructibility and the uniqueness of it. So land plus all human-made improvements to the land that are permanently attached or annexed to it. So we have dirt, we have land, we build a home, we finish the home, we move into the home, we add an addition onto it, to the side, we add it to the top. All that is considered real property. An improvement to the land can be any artificial thing attached on or below ground, such as a building, fence, a water line, or sewer pipe, as well as growing things that are made part of the landscaping. So crops can be part of it. So real property is the interest, the benefits, and the rights that are automatically included in the ownership of real estate. So here's a diagram that talks about land, real estate, and real property. So we have air rights, we have surface rights, and then we have subsurface rights. Subsurface rights would be water, any type of minerals. Surface rights would be the land itself that it sits on, and then air rights would be so much that we have above. So an example that we talk about in class is in downtown Denver, right around 20th and Broadway, that area, there's a very, very old church. It's a historical church. It's protected from destruction because of the integrity of the building. It's been around since the 1800s, but it sat on prime property. The land that it sat on was worth a lot of money. The building next to it that was being developed, which is Wells Fargo today, wanted to build, a much larger scale type building next to it, but there wasn't enough land around next to it where Wells Fargo wanted to build this land. So Wells Fargo built up and over. And so they actually built over the church itself. So the church actually they released their air rights, their legal rights above where the church was, so that Wells Fargo could build this very large building in downtown Denver. That would be an example of the air rights that specific entity sold off to another entity so that they could build. We talk about physical improvements. So anything, the land is always going to be there. The land doesn't go away. The land doesn't burn. It doesn't get, if there's an earthquake, it's not gonna get destructive. Nothing's gonna ever happen. It's always there. The physical improvements through real estate is the land plus any permanent human-made additions. And then we have what we call our bundle of rights. And we're going to talk more about that as we move on. So bundle of legal rights. You know, write this down. This is going to be for a flashcard. Is anything that has possession, control, enjoyment, exclusion, and disposition. Those are the bundle of your legal rights as a homeowner. Or I won't say as a homeowner, as an owner of real property. So the right to possess, control, enjoy, exclude, and disposition. So title to real property, the right to or ownership of the property, including the owner's bundle of legal rights and the evidence of that ownership by a deed. So the deed is the document that we use to transfer from one individual to the other. So the grantor to the grantee is the transfer of the deed. Any questions so far? Okay, just checking here. So we have surface rights. Let's talk about surface rights. So surface rights is the ownership rights in a parcel of real estate that are limited to the surface of the earth. Subsurface rights are the rights to the natural resources below the earth's surface. So one perfect example would be like water, oil, any type of natural resources, any type of minerals. Those would be your subsurface rights. And then air rights is the rights to use the space above the earth. It may be sold or leased independently, provided by the rights that have not been limited by law. And the example I gave you was here in Denver. We had a very old church. It sat on land that was worth a lot of money, and the neighbor next door wanted to expand, but they couldn't buy the church and destroy the church because it just couldn't happen for a variety of different reasons. So they thought, well, we're going to build up, why can't we just build over? So they built straight up, and then they built over, and they've actually purchased the airspace from this church so that they can build this very large building in downtown Denver. Now, there are limitations as far as air rights. We don't have, the rights to the air from, the roof of the pitch of our home, to, outer space or wherever. There are limitations as to what we have and what we don't have. Just like an example, commercial aircraft or private aircraft, they have to abide by the air rights that they can only fly so low. We can only own and build so high. So we can only go up so high, they can only go down so low. So water rights. So let's talk about water rights. And we're going to talk more about water rights in Colorado as well. But for the national side, water rights is riparian rights are common law rights of owners of land that borders a flowing body of water. Okay, so riparian rights are common. So this is something that you're going to have to just memorize and know the definition under water rights. Riparian rights are common law rights of owners of land that borders a flowing body of water. So like a stream, a river, any type of body of water that borders an individual's land. Littoral rights belong to owners of land that borders lakes, seas, or the ocean. Littoral rights belong to owners of land that borders lakes, seas, or ocean. Those are two definitions that you need to know, and you're going to see more and more of this as we proceed through the sessions. But again, these two definitions, make sure you have a clear understanding. So either take a picture of the screen right now or write it down, but there's two flashcards right there. And then let's talk about accretion, erosion, and avulsion. That adds to or decreases the land by natural action of water. Accretion, erosion, and avulsion. And then the doctrine of prior appropriation grants states the right to determine ownership and use of water. Every state is different. In Colorado, we follow the doctrine of prior appropriation. So we have water rights and we have ownership. So just because there's water on someone's property does not mean that that individual owns that water rights. Somebody else may own the water rights to that. Now, if we just have a regular home in the city, tract housing, we purchase our water from the city, then of course we don't have any type of water rights. But if we're out in the rural areas, up in the foothills, the mountains, the doctrine of prior appropriation could fall into place. We may have water, we may have a well on the land, but that does not mean that we have ownership to that well. Somebody else could have ownership to the well, and that falls under the doctrine of prior appropriation. So let's talk about the characteristics of real property. So economic characteristics would be scarcity, improvements, permanence of investment, and area preference. Those would be 4 different economic characteristics of real property. So it's not going to be physical. It's not something that we see or look at. It's something that causes through the economy. Okay, and then we're going to talk about real property versus personal property. So we have real property, and then we have personal property. So personal property, factory-built housing, plants and growing crops, known as emblements. So if we have a plant and or growing crops in a transaction, those plants, those crops are called emblements. Personal property is going to be property that's going to be transferred by a bill of sale. That would include items such as a refrigerator, a stove, patio furniture, the hot tub out on the patio. Anything that's not permanently affixed to the property would be considered personal property. Once it's permanently affixed to the property itself, then it becomes real property. Factory-built housing, there's a variety of different types of factory-built housing, and some of that could be personal property, some of it may be considered real property. But factory-built housing, we're given an example that it could be personal property, but it also could fall under real property as well, because there's a process that they go through with factory-built housing where they transfer it from personal property and make it into real property. But for test purposes, factory-built housing could be personal property. Okay, so we talked about a little bit about fixtures. So classifications of fixtures. A fixture is a personal property that has been so attached to the land or a building that by law it becomes part of the real property. So an example would be the light fixtures in the home, okay? The sinks, the faucets, the toilets. Those are all fixtures. They're permanently affixed to the building and or the land, and therefore become part of the real property. So they're not transferred through a bill of sale. They're not considered personal property like we would if we were transferring, say, the washer and the dryer. So legal tests of a fixture to determine, it would be the method of annexation, the adaptability of the item to the land's use, the relationship of the parties, the intention in placing the item on the land, and the agreement of the parties. So laws that affect real estate. Let's talk a little bit more about this now. So we have contract law, we have general property law, we have agency law, we have real estate license law, and we have laws that have jurisdiction under federal, state, and local laws regarding consumer protection, environmental protection, taxes, land use, and zoning. So the laws that are affecting real estate, we have contract law. We have the laws that follow through the contract that we have to follow, and those can or cannot affect real estate transactions, depending on what we're going to have in the contract itself. And then we have general property laws. We have laws that have protection regarding the jurisdiction that the property is in. We have agency law that would fall under the brokerage, the realtor, as far as individual agency or dual agency. We have real estate license law, laws that we have to follow through as licensee. And then again, under federal, state, and local laws regarding the consumer protection, environmental laws and protections, taxes. We all have to pay taxes, whether it's personal property taxes, land use. We have laws and rules that fall under land use, and then zoning. So moving on to Unit 3, interest in real estate. Ownership of a parcel of real estate include all or some of the bundle of rights. Depending on the type of interest a person holds in the property, ownership may be limited by public and private restrictions intended to ensure that one owner's use and the enjoyment of the property owned does not interfere with others' use and enjoyment of the property or with the welfare of the general public. So our learning objectives for this next one is going to be identify and describe the various types of estates, explain the differences between liens and other types of encumbrances, and explain the limitations on private property rights for the welfare of the public. So in the estates and land, we have freehold estates. We call fee simple estate, fee simple absolute, fee simple defeasible, and fee simple determinable. We're going to talk more in depth about these and explain the definitions of all these as we move forward. Fee simple absolute is the estate where you have the ability to do everything. You can buy it, you can sell it, you can will it, you can gift it, you can do whatever you want with it. It is fee simple absolute. So let's talk about life estates. Life estates, we have conventional life estates, which are ordinary with the remainder or reversion. And then we have legal life estate, which is homestead and courtesy. And we're going to go through these more in depth, okay? So let's talk about encumbrances. Encumbrances can be either through an easement, private restrictions, liens, and or encroachments. So easements are, can anybody explain what an easement is that you may have read about it? So an easement is the right of way, the permission that is agreed upon by two parties to allow an individual to cross through another individual's land. There may be a house that, and there's a variety of different types of easements. People have easements through their properties right now that they're not even aware of that they have. For example, there are easements through, say, the cable company. The cable company has the ability, the right to come in and lay down cable lines through everyone's yards. We don't really have a say on that because that already has an easement. They have the ability, they have the power to do that, the permission to do that, the legal right to do that. But there also could be easements where an individual has an easement, maybe to get to the main road, they have to cut through their neighbor's land. And so there's an easement allowing them to drive across their neighbor's land from point A to point B. And then other encumbrances could be liens, whether they're voluntary or involuntary. Liens tend to sound a little bit negative. People think, my gosh, I must have done something bad, or that can't be me because, I didn't do anything wrong. But liens can be voluntary or involuntary. Voluntary would be we take out a mortgage. Somebody does financing on their house. They're going to refinance. They're going to get a home equity line of credit. They want to do some home improvements. Whatever the case is, when an individual borrows money from a bank and the bank secures the property as collateral for that loan, they will encumber a lien on the property. Now, involuntary lien could be where perhaps maybe you didn't pay your property taxes or you didn't pay your federal income tax. They have the jurisdiction to put a lien on your property, meaning that if you don't pay your bill, they will lien your property and put that bill, attach it to your property, so that eventually they will get paid. A mechanic's lien is also something that could be involuntary. An individual has a contractor work on their home and do some work, and they come to an agreement that they're going to pay them X amount of dollars. And then the contractor completes all the work on the property. They bill the homeowner, and for whatever reason, whether it's right or wrong, the homeowner says, I'm not paying you because I feel you didn't do the work properly, or you didn't complete the work, or you didn't do what I thought I had paid you to do, so therefore I'm not going to pay. If that's the case, that contractor can provide proof to the courts that he or she is due that money, and they would put what they call a mechanic's lien on the property, meaning that the contractor should have been paid, was not paid, did provide proof that they are owed that money, and therefore they get a lien put on the property so that eventually they'll get paid. And then we have encroachments. Encroachments is when one homeowner's land, their property may encroach over another person's property. An example would be in very, very old neighborhoods. Sometimes the houses are so close together that the gutters actually kind of can almost touch each other. If you've ever seen some really old neighborhoods, that would be an encroachment. Maybe somebody built a fence and they just kind of guessed at it. And they said, yeah, I think if I put the fence right down this line right here, that should be really good between my house and my neighbor's house. And a survey was done later and they found out that they're 4 inches over to the left too far, and that fence is encroaching onto their neighbor's land. That would be an encroachment. So liens could be, as we explained, real estate taxes, unpaid. Mortgages would be, so real estate taxes would be involuntary, and then mortgages would be voluntary. Judgments, if you're sued in court and they seek out your assets, they know that you have a home, the individual has a house, or they own property, real property, they could get judgment and then lien that property for that judgment. And then we also talked about mechanics lien. And contractor is hired, they complete the work, whatever the disagreement is between the owner of the real property and that contractor, they don't pay the contractor, that contractor can then put a mechanics lien on the property so that they can eventually get paid at some point. Let's talk about private restrictions on the use of real estate. So we have what we call deed restrictions, and then we have covenants, conditions, and restrictions, also known as CC&Rs. So deed restrictions could be a variety of different things. One would be a 55 plus community. So in the deed, because we transfer property from one owner to the other, the grantor signs over the deed to the grantee, and that deed restriction could be in place where in order to purchase this home, in order for this property to be transferred legally from one owner to the other, you must be 55 plus or older to live in this property. Maybe perhaps it's under the affordability, the affordable housing program. And deed restrictions are that they have to fall under certain categories such as income and number of residents inside the property, inside the home. And in order to transfer the home from one owner to the other, there's a deed restriction and they have to follow the program and the different rules, regulations, policies, whatever, in order to purchase that home. There could be a variety of different ways, but those would be pretty much good examples. And then we have private restrictions where covenants, conditions, and restrictions. So in some communities, we have HOAs, and there are restrictions on what somebody can or can't do. For example, they may say that you have to have a certain color palette throughout the community in order to live in this community. So you just can't paint your house whatever color you want. You have to go and get permission, and there may be color palettes that you have to pick. And maybe every other third house can only be brown, or maybe every other fifth house has to be a shade of blue. Whatever the case is, you'd have to follow that. You may not be able to park your car out in the street. You may have to, it may be required that everybody has a tree in their front yard, and a storm comes and an extra tree down, you would have to maybe replant that. Those are just simple examples, but those would be covenants, conditions, and restrictions to live in those type of communities that you have to follow. Those are all restrictions on those type of properties. Any questions? We're going to come back to that. So terminating an easement. So an easement terminates when the need no longer exists. So you can't just terminate one person can't just terminate an easement. It takes two parties to terminate, and or if the easement no longer needs to exist. For example, if you had an easement with your neighbor and then you bought your neighbor's home, well, now you own both properties. There's no reason to have an easement because it doesn't exist. You don't need to give yourself permission to cross over your own land. That would be an example where it no longer exists. But if the two different homeowners owned properties, let's just say side by side, and an easement was put in place allowing one homeowner to cross over the other homeowner's property, they got into a disagreement, an argument, whatever the case is, and that homeowner says, you're no longer going to come on my land, I'm going to terminate the easement. Well, that can't happen because both parties would have to agree to it. And then if somebody was to abandon, that would be another an example of terminating easement. So easements for the most part are indefinite unless there's there's a change, and the change either has to be because it no longer exists and or both parties have to agree for whatever reason that they're going to end that easement. And then we have what we call license, we have encroachment, and we have less pendants. Less pendants is a pending legal action. It would be if a lawsuit is going to be filed but is not finalized, and they seeked out an individual person's assets, and they saw, oh, this individual owns this real property over here, or they own real property over there, and that individual is going to be part of a lawsuit and or a court case situation, they may file what we call a les pendens. That means pending legal action. That kind of locks that property on hold. That individual can't sell the property, they can't refinance, they can't take out a loan, they can't do anything. It's kind of like a cloud on title. And until that legal action is cleared up, they really can't do anything. It's kind of like putting somebody on notice that they're going to get sued. The encroachment we talked about, that's the legal extension beyond the boundaries of the land. You know, you may have thought that your boundaries, the land that you owned, was down this one line, and it turns out that really, you know, and when you put up that fence, you actually were 2 feet over into your neighbor's yard. That would be considered encroachment. So we have another thing for test purposes, another thing for our cards is governmental powers. The government has a variety of different powers. The 4 that we're going to talk about is police power, eminent domain, taxation, and escheat. So police power, that would be areas that are enforced by the government through zoning, building codes, anything that that the government can or cannot control when it comes to real property. Eminent domain would be and with police power, there's no compensation to the homeowner. They're just advised that, for example, we may have to have a setback. All the houses have to be set back 20 feet from the sidewalk. You can't just build a house 2 feet from the sidewalk. Everybody has to build 20 feet back. Or in this zoning, we're changing the zoning from residential to commercial. So any home that is knocked down must come back as a commercial building. You can't rebuild it as a residential because the zoning has changed from residential to commercial. Things are grandfathered in. However, if that property was destroyed, knocked down, whatever the case may be, they would have to build it back as a commercial property and not allowed to be built as a residential property. Those would be all examples of police power. Eminent domain is when the government comes in and says, we're going to buy your house. You don't have a option of selling. We're going to come in and we're going to purchase your home because we're expanding the highway. That would be a perfect example. We're going to expand the highway and your home happens to sit in the area where we're going to expand. Therefore, we're going to give you the fair market value of the home. Here's the fair market value of the home, and you need to be out by such date. That is something that the homeowner really can't fight. It is something that happens when they're going to improve or expand the community, and it basically it's right where the home is at. So that's right amount of check. Taxation, everybody has to pay taxes, whether we like it or not. We have to pay taxes. Those are the government powers. So we have county, state, federal, we have a variety of different types of taxation, but that would be government powers. If we have real property, the county generally that the property sits in has the power to tax that homeowner because they are utilizing all the services within the county, the roads, the schools, the highways, the parks, whatever they're doing, sewers, the water, so they're taxed through that, and you have to pay those taxes when you're living there. And then we have the government powers, what we call escheat. So escheat is when an individual passes away and they don't have a will, and they don't have any heirs to leave the property to. Goes through probate, individual passes away, there's no will, he goes to probate. Probate does their work. They determine that there's no heirs with this individual. Therefore, the property is transferred to the government, either through the state, the county, wherever the property happens to be located at, and then it is sold, and the government retains the earnings from the sale of the property. So escheat definitely is going to be on the test, and we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of the definition of it. So escheat is when you basically die without a will and there are no heirs. The government takes the property back. So forms of real estate ownership. Although the forms of ownership available are controlled by state law, real estate may be held in one of three basic ways. They include ownership in severalty, meaning one owner, co-ownership, more than one owner, and ownership by a trust, property held for the benefit of another. So when an individual person purchases a home by themselves, they own it out by themselves, they own it in severalty. If there's two or more, then it's either tenants in common or joint tenancy. Tenants in common and or joint tenancy. And then if the property is held by a trust, that is put in place to benefit the party, so that when the individual does pass, that there is no issues relating to heirs fighting over the property and or the property going into probate and having the government determine how they're going to distribute the estate. It's all spelled out, and it's put in place as far as how it's going to be transferred. So learning objectives here for ownership is define and explain the distinction between ownership and severalty and co-ownership. We're going to describe the various forms of co-ownership in real estate, such as we just talked about, joint tenancy, tenants in common. We're going to describe the key elements of trusts, partnerships, corporations, and LLCs. And we're going to identify and describe the types of properties ownership for common interest properties. So let's start out with ownership and severalty. Again, that is the property when it is owned by one individual, a corporation, or the entity. So that would be just one individual. Co-ownership, we talked about, is property that is owned by two or more individuals. So the forms of co-ownership: tenancy in common, joint tenancy, tenancy by the entirety, and community property. Depending on what state that we live in, that isn't always going to fall in place. For example, Colorado is not a community property state. The three that we're going to talk about is in severalty, meaning individual by one; tenancy in common, meaning we have two or more people that own the property and it is in a undivided percentage. Everybody owns maybe 10, 20, 30% of the property. Joint tenancy is, can anybody explain what joint tenancy is?
I can
think,
stop choking.
When there's two or more individuals that own equal, it's divided equally.
Okay. And and what
theories,
happens
right?
with it though? There's a key element to this for joint tenancy.
If one person passes away, then that share is divided equally among the other remaining people, I believe.
That would be tenancy in common. Joint tenancy is survivorship. So if there are two people that own a property, let's say, for example, and they have it as in joint tenancy, and the individual passes, that automatically goes to the other owner that owns the property with them.
Gotcha.
Tenants in common is where you own a percentage of it. And for example, and this is going to be helpful for the test. So tenancy in common, if we have, let's say, 5 individuals own an investment property, okay? 5 family members, 5 friends, 5 whatever. 5 people own this one property, and one of them passes away. Based on their will, right, based on their estate, their percentage, their portion of that home is going to go to somebody that they're going to will it to. It could be a variety of different scenarios, but their will dictate where their percentage is going to go to. Joint tenancy, if there are 2 people that own the property and one passes, doesn't matter if that individual has a will, as an estate, or whatever that says that's going to distribute all their assets. That particular property automatically is transferred to the other survivor, the person who survived it. Now, this is where I talk about when we say we don't give out tax advice and we don't give out legal advice. An example would be when we write the contract up, we have to put down how the individual is going to take ownership of the property. Now, if it's an individual person, then that automatically is in severalty. There's no question to that. They automatically take ownership in severalty. But if we're selling a property, say, for example, to a married couple or just a couple in a non-domestic relationship. They may ask us, well, gosh, should we take it in tenancy in common or joint tenancy? We will explain to them the definitions of tenancy in common, and we will explain to them the definitions of joint tenancy, but we will never tell them how they should carry it, because everybody's very different, and ownership is, I mean, it could cause, financial or legal hardship on somebody. I'll give an example. I always gave this, and Michelle probably remembers this when I gave this example at the last class. So joint tenancy. Let's just say that we have two adults who, whether they're legally married or not, they're together, okay? And they buy the home. And they had relationships with other people in the past, and they have adult children, okay? And their intentions are that they would keep their own individual assets and pass their assets on to their children from their previous relationships. They don't want to cross over, their assets with the other adult children that they didn't bring into this world. So let's just say they ask us for advice, and we say, oh, well, let's just go joint tenancy. You're together, you're married, or whatever the relationship is. And then one of them passes. Well, that individual's assets just went to the survivor spouse. And now the intent of that person was that they wanted to leave their assets to their children from that other relationship. Well, their children from that other relationship are not going to get that house because we gave advice by saying go into joint tenancy, which automatically gave it to their survivorship of the individual they were in. And so that could cause a lot of problems for a lot of people, right? Same thing with tenancy in common. It could be vice versa. They may want survivorship, and we gave them advice by saying, oh, you know what? Since, you've only known each other for 2 years, you probably don't want to do joint. I mean, it's really we have no legal jurisdiction to be giving legal advice out like that. So we would say, oh yeah, go tenancy in common because it looks like you've only known each other for 2 years. Well, it doesn't matter. That's not our decision to make. Everybody has their own reasons based on their own personal lives on how they want to do that. So we would ask them, we would explain to them, and if they can't make a decision on how they want to take ownership, and I'm saying this for test purposes also, is that we would always advise them to seek legal counsel. Okay, same thing for taxes. If I buy this house and I sell my other house, am I going to have capital gains? I don't know. I'm not a tax advisor. I have a real estate license in the state of Colorado. I am not a tax advisor. I'm going to recommend that you consult with a tax advisor. I'm going to recommend that you consult with counsel, with an attorney, and let he or she explain this to you and make that decision for you. You can sit there and explain everything to them. If they still don't get it, they still can't make a decision, that's when we're going to refer. Now, a little hint for test purposes. If you are unsure of the answer, and one of the options is seek legal counsel or seek tax advice, 99.9% of the time, that's going to be the answer. Okay.
Oh, okay. I wanted to say something, and then I had and I have a question for you, Vince. But Anthony, one way, because I was getting tripped up over tenants in common and joint tenancy, and in the book, it had for joint tenancy just us, and I remember that because they're both J's. And then tenants in common said to the children. So I know it can be passed to somebody. So that's how I remember those. But my question for you, Vincent, is once there is just one sole owner that may have been in a joint tenancy, once it's just theirs, they can will it to someone else, right? Once everybody else has died off and it's just their house now.
Then they would, yes, and they, again, they'd have to go through legal counsel to determine how they can do all that. So it doesn't automatically transfer into severalty. If so if we have two people that own a home together and they have it in joint tenancy, and then one of them passes away, it doesn't automatically transfer into severalty.
Oh, okay.
They now own that property 100%. Okay. But then what would happen is they would then remove that individual, the deceased party, off the deed. And then by doing that, when they create the new deed transfer, it would then go into severalty. So yes, you are correct.
Okay.
Yeah. There'll be a process. It's not automatic, but there would be a process. And that would be the process. So yes, you are correct.
Okay.
Tenancy by the entirety happens to do with community property. We don't have community property in Colorado, so don't get confused with it. It's basically when it's like equal share. Okay, tenancy by the entirety. It's a community property position where both parties basically carry the same ownership, equal amounts of ownership. Nobody owns more than the other. It's the same. Now, you'll see things, here's examples of where we'll see things on the national side that we do not have on the Colorado side, because we're not a community property state. So examples would be, being that we're not community properties, that if you go into a relationship with somebody, and then that relationship is legally severed, meaning divorced, if you obtain that property prior to the entering into that relationship legally, then that would be considered your own personal property to dispose of. However, in community property states, and I'm going to get into all kinds of legal things, but I will just explain a little bit about it, is that with community property states, it's basically when two people join forces, they now obtain each other's assets. Okay, so that's for the national side to know. When we get onto the Colorado side, I don't want to confuse it, but when we get onto the Colorado side, we are not a community property state. And there may be questions about community property, so that's why we have to make sure that we understand the difference between national and the state side. Okay, but we're going to know about community property on the national side because we need to understand the definitions and what that all means. Okay. So the different forms of co-ownership: tenancy in common, joint tenancy, tenancy by the entirety, and community property, which basically those last two are about the same. And then ownerships, trusts, and business organizations. We have living and different types of trusts. We have land trusts. Business organizations can also own the property, such as partnerships, corporations, and limited liability companies. We also have condominiums, cooperatives, and timeshares. Timeshares are considered real property. Okay, so even though you go there 2 weeks out of the year and you feel like you're staying in a hotel, if you do own a timeshare, it is transferred by a deed from a grantor to the grantee. So it is considered real property for test purposes. And then with condominium ownership, we have the common elements. We also have right of first refusal, and we have HOA. So common elements mean in the condominium, we own a certain percentage of that community. Maybe there's 100 units, so we own 1/100th, of that community. We own our individual box, all the inside the walls, the airspace inside the walls, but on the outside the walls, it is now considered community ownership. We all equally own that area together. It's the common areas. Right of first refusal and the HOA. So the HOA is the governing organization that kind of covers everything inside those communities. They're the ones that set the rules and the regulations, the do's and the don'ts, the things that we can and can't do. And then the right of first refusal, that would be an example in an HOA communities where sometimes in some HOAs, the owners have the right to purchase that property before it goes out to the open, to the public, to the open market. So if a home is put on the market, for example, and this is something that you have to be aware of, you have to understand how this works, because you may be representing a seller someday. And that community may have the right of first refusal, which means it depends on the community, but it may say the first 14 days that the home is on the market, anybody in the community has the right to purchase that before somebody out in the public does, outside of that community. Or we have first right of refusal of 12 days or whatever the bylaws state inside the CCNRs. Not all HOAs have that, but some do. And that also happens with co-ops, because in co-ops we buy shares. We don't actually own the unit. So when we buy into the co-op, we actually buy like shares, like we would like stock. We have ownership in the shares, and then we buy and sell when we transfer in and out of that property. Again, we don't have a lot in Colorado. I think that I'm aware of. I think we have maybe 2 in the Denver metro area, and I think like one of them, I know one in particular that's in Lakewood, and then there's another one in Denver that I'm aware of. And there may be more, but it's very, very unlikely. But there are some parts of the country where that's normal. Like, big example would be New York. It's a very, very common practice for New York to have co-ops. But even though we may not do them in Colorado, we have to have a clear understanding of how they work and how they're transferred. And for test purposes, timeshares, remember, are transferred with the deed, so they are considered real property, and that will be a test question. Because people think timeshares, it's kind of like going on vacation or staying at an Airbnb or a hotel. You really actually own it like you do a home. So co-op ownership, corporation holds the title, corporation conducts the bylaws, and the shares are sold through stock, as we talked about for co-ops. Timeshare, it is ownership. It's used. We don't have full use out of it. There's a portion that we're used depending on, what you bought. Sometimes people buy 2 weeks a year. Sometimes people buy 1 week a year. Sometimes people earn more as time goes on. There's a variety of different ways. The key component to this is that it is considered real property and you do have ownership in it. So you may, one of 600 people, have ownership in that one unit. So you may have, that one 1/600th of ownership may give you 7 days a year, or whatever that may equal to. Okay, so let's talk about land description. Any questions so far what we talked about though? Please always jump in if you have any questions. Just raise your hand or just speak up, unmute yourself and ask your questions. So land description, a street address, while helpful for finding the location of a property or building, is not precise enough to define the perimeter of a parcel of land in a way that excludes all other parcels. A property description must be legally sufficient or described in a way that will enable a sales contract, deed, or mortgage document to be legally enforceable. A legal description is a detailed way of describing a parcel of land for such documents. The description is based on information collected through a survey. So anytime that we transfer property, regardless of whether we have the street address, we have to have the legal description of the property on the deed when we're transferring the property. Otherwise, it is not valid. So we're going to identify and explain, excuse me. Learning objectives, we're going to identify and explain the methods used for describing real estate. We're going to explain the process involved in identifying and measuring property rights, including those above and below the surface. So meets and bounds. Michelle, can you give an example of what meets and bounds might be like?
I am reading these notes.
Let me interrupt really quick. So we have 3 different ways, 3 methods of describing real estate. And then Michelle, since you have done this already before. Maybe you can jump in and give some examples, but we go either by meets and bounds, we go by rectangular, or also known for test purposes, government survey. And then we have lot and block, which is a recorded plat. So let's start with meets and bounds. Michelle, can you give us an example of what meets and bounds might be?
An example? I mean, I wrote the I wrote the definition down. I have a meets and bounds description starts with the designated place on the parcel called a POB or point of beginning. It will also end at the point of beginning. I don't know how in depth you want me to go.
Go ahead.
On those, well, so let me back up. Meets is the measure and bounds is the linear directions. Within the meets and bounds system, they have monuments, which is a fixed object used to identify the point of beginning, which could be a rock, a tree.
Yep, a tree, any object,
Yep.
object could really be.
So that's what I wrote down for my notes.
Okay.
So that's all I have for that.
Okay. And then how about rectangular survey?
It is also known as the government survey system. This system is based on two sets of intersecting lines, principal meridians and baselines. The principal meridians run north and south, and the baselines run east and west. Also within this are tiers. Wait, or am I skipping? Yeah, the tiers are still in the rectangular survey system. And the tiers are running, their lines running east and west, parallel to the baseline and 6 miles apart. Do you want me to get into this township and all that?
Yep, you're welcome to. Go ahead.
Okay, you're like, you need a break.
No, good. I just want to make sure you guys, so you're reading these.
So they run parallel to the baseline and are 6 miles apart. Those are called township lines. And then there are ranges that run on either side of the principal meridian that's divided into 6 mile wide strips as well. And these all create townships, okay. Which there's 36 of them. I'm trying to figure out how to describe this.
36 what now?
There's 36 sections
in a township. So this is you have to remember this one.
So there's 36 sections in a township. Each one is 1 square mile each, which is.
And where's the school at?
Oh, and I saw that.
Need to know this too.
16.
16 for school. There you go.
Yep, I don't see it.
Your homework. Don't get the star.
Yeah, I need to get. I need to get through this time. So.
And then we have our lot and block, which is going to be your most basic one that we all probably know if we all live in urban areas.
I had a question though for you, Vincent, because on the exam, are we going to need to calculate this rectangular survey system, like the acres or convert acres and all that?
Yep.
Okay.
We're going to go through all this. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll need to know that. So we have, again, oh my gosh. So we have meets and bounds, rectangular survey, also known as government survey for test purposes, okay? And then lot and block. Lot and block is going to be your most common. Lot and block is going to be, if you're in an urban setting and you have house after house after house, it's going to be lot 12, block 52, lot 13, block 52, it's going to go all the way down the street. So that's going to be your most common. Meets and bounds is going to be more like rural areas, living in the mountains in Colorado, living in the foothills. And as Michelle stated, they actually will use an object. It could be, literally, it could be a rock that's been there for, 1,000 years, or it could be a fence post, or it could be, some type of object where the meets and bounds will start and end. Okay. All right, so here's an example of meets and bounds. The starting starts at a point of beginning. So the monuments are fixed objects used to identify all the corners of the parcels of the ends of the boundary segments and the location of the intersecting boundaries. So again, this is it right here. That's how we look at. So we're at the corner of the road, but rectangular survey system is the principal meridian, tiers, ranges, townships, and sections. So let's go over the townships and sections again, Michelle, because this is important for test purposes. And we're going to learn more about this as we move on with math. These are going to be math equations, but go ahead and talk about the townships and the sections, please. How many sections in a township?
There's 36. They're
Okay,
each
so
1 square mile.
So remember that, everybody, there's 36 sections in a township. And the schools are located where?
In section 16.
Okay. These are all kind of like formulas to understand now, so that when we're doing our math later, you'll be able to calculate this. So 36 sections in a township. Section 16 is always reserved for schools. And we read from right to left with the sections, right?
Yes.
So the upper right corner will be 1, and then we go right to left, and then we scroll back down like that.
Does your slide show a picture of it? Oh, no, you don't, huh?
No, this one doesn't, but I have the other one that does, and I can go back to the other one.
I don't know if you can.
So lot and block method is lot and block number, and it's going to be basically in your typical urban setting in a subdivision. So if you have, a subdivision within in the city or in your area, it's going to be just house after house after house. It's going to be lot and block. Okay. Okay, here's the math part that you were just talking about, Michelle. So we need to understand this here. Okay, so a mile is 5,280 feet. So for math equations, you're going to have to maybe convert acres into square miles into acres. But we need to understand the foundation, the basic foundation. So a mile is 5,280 feet. 1 square mile equals 640 acres. And an acre equals to 43,560 square feet. And one way to remember this is for an acre to be converted into square feet. And why? Because there may be some math questions where you have 6 acres and you need to calculate the square footage of that area. So you need to understand per acre is 43,560 times whatever, they're asking. Remember this. So, well, a mile is, everybody in Colorado, we should all know what a mile is, right?
Right.
Okay. We get the benefit of that one.
Mm-hmm.
Square mile, just remember 640 acres. And then the other way to remember an acre converting to square feet is 711. 43,560. The 4 and 3 is a 7. The 5 and 6 is 11. Kind of like 7-Eleven, like the store. Is a way to remember that. Okay. Okay, so we're done there. I'm going to log off of this, and I'm going to bring our other one on. Okay. I'm going to go through over here and just bring.
See, I like this one. It's more interactive.
This other one we do?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to go over the characteristics of real estate because this one is a little bit more in detail. So what are the physical characteristics of real estate? It is immobile, it's indestructible, and it's unique. So we can't, just remember, we can't pick it up, and we can't we can't pick up real estate and just move it. It's indestructible. Example would be the land. Land does not burn. The earth does not just burn and go away. If there's an earthquake, it doesn't go away. It may crack, but it's not going to go. It's not going to move. It's not going to go anywhere, right? But we can pick up an RV and move it. We can pick up a camper and we can move it. We can pick up a car and move it, but we can't pick up real estate and move it. It's immobile and it's indestructible. Okay, and then let's talk about the bundle of rights too, because we need to study this because this can get a little bit confusing for people. The acronym for bundle of rights, this is good for your little 3x5 card, is the acronym PCEED. Okay, so let's write that down, PCEED. So possession, the P is possession, the right to occupy. Control within the law. We have to follow the law. So you have the right to occupy the property, the ownership of real estate, right? You have the right to occupy. You buy it, it's yours. Nobody can come in and say, you have to leave now, you have to go away, it's yours, you own it. It's real property. It's within the law. We have to follow the laws. There's rules everywhere, right? We have to use the property legally. So there's certain jurisdictions that say what we can and can't do in properties. Okay, now this is, just remember, this is national, but examples would be, in Colorado, maybe in one city we can do something that we can't do in another city, or maybe in a jurisdiction of a certain a municipality in the city, one area we can, what we can't. Enjoyment, use the property legally. Exclusion, keep others from entering or using. So we have rights. People can't just walk in our house, right? They have to legally get permission to come into your to the property. They can't just walk on your land. They can't just drive over your land. I mean, and then disposition, D. You have the right to sell your property, will it, transfer it, whatever you want to do. It's your property. The homeowner has that right to however they want to transfer that property. So the bundle of rights for ownership of real property. This is going to be a test question. I'm telling you right now. There could be several different test questions here. If you understand the acronym PCEED, you'll have no problem answering the questions. Okay. So remember, there's 5 rights under the bundle of rights: possession, control, enjoyment, exclusion, and disposition. If you know those, you'll answer all the questions regarding this, I assure you. So write PCED on the top, on the front of your little card, and on the back, write down these 5 different answers to it, what they stand for, and know the definitions. I just want to kind of go through some of this again because some of these are, okay, water rights. And we'll get more into this when we get into Colorado, because Colorado and water rights is a really big deal, okay? Water in Colorado is so we have riparian rights, rights granted to the owners of land along a river, stream, or similar body of water, okay? Remember that, riparian rights. Littoral rights is the rights of owners whose land borders commercial navigable lakes, seas, and oceans. And then the three items, and you just have to memorize these: accretion, erosion, and avulsion. Accretion is increases in land resulting from deposit of soil by water's action. So it's actually increasing. Erosion, we all know what erosion is. It's when the loss of the soil by natural resources, maybe a mudslide, a rock slide. There could be, an earthquake, and the earth can shift. But erosion, and then avulsion is the sudden removal of soil due to the act of nature. So erosion is gradual. Avulsion is sudden. It happens like right away. So avulsion, I'm going to correct myself. An example of avulsion would be a rock slide, right? Because that doesn't just gradually over time happen. All of a sudden we're driving, all of a sudden there's a rock slide it just comes down onto the road, right? It falls off the mountain and just rolls off. Erosion would be over time, as we start getting a lot of rain, and it starts, gradually washing some of the soil away, and then more and more and more until it just all goes away. That would be a slower process. So accretion is the opposite. It increases the land from deposits of soil. Somehow the water is increasing, and then erosion and avulsion means takes away. Okay, and this is one that you have to know being in Colorado. The doctrine of prior appropriation. It's when the water rights are controlled by the state. Colorado is one of the few states that has the doctrine of prior appropriation, and that is because we have, even though we say we think we're always in a drought and all that, we have an abundance of water, right? Because of all the snowfall that we have in our mountains. We sell off millions of gallons of water every year to outlying states, Arizona, California. So the water rights are controlled by the state of Colorado. And we'll talk more about that when we get onto the state side. But for test purposes, remember, understand what the doctrine of prior appropriation is. And in Colorado, that is enacted. We do have that. Some economic characteristics of real estate we talked about. SIPL, write that down for your little card. S stands for scarcity. I stands for improvement. P stands for permanence, and L means location. For exam purposes, more than likely, you're going to see scarcity, location, and durability. So add that to it. It'd be SLD, scarcity, location, and durability. So it's either SIPL or SLD. So make a card, one for SIPL, one for SLD. They both are characteristic or economic characteristics. And then, can anybody tell me the difference between real property and personal property?
For one, real property is transferred via deed. Personal property is transferred via bill of sale. Real property would be, I don't know if you want an example, but real property is the house, and personal property be the appliance, something extra you're leaving there that is not attached to the home.
Right. Very good. Good job, Michelle. So yeah, so real property is the land plus improvements, right? We have land and we build a structure, and we maybe add on to that structure. We may make an addition. We add a garage that's going to be attached to that. We all consider real property. Land plus improvements and the rights. Personal property is everything else. Both are transferred by deeds. Excuse me. The real property is transferred by a deed. And then as Michelle stated, personal property is transferred by a bill of sale. And personal property is attached in a non-permanent way. And it can be with the expectations that it's going to be moved. So yes, we're going to deliver a refrigerator into the home. It is in a non-permanent way. It's going to be there, it's going to stay there, but it's not attached to the home. And at some point, we know that that refrigerator is going to be removed, either because we're going to get a new one, we're going to sell the house, it's going to break, whatever, it's going to break down, whatever the case is. If we sell any of the personal property through the transaction of the sale of real property, we transfer it with a bill of sale. It's not part of the sale of the house. It's a separate sale and it's transferred with the bill of sale. Definitely going to be test questions. Real property is transferred by a deed. Personal property is transferred by a bill of sale.
I have a question about that. Say you are a buyer and you walk into the seller's home, something that is considered personal property if you really like it. Could you ask them if they could leave it and you buy it, or are you
Yeah,
not?
that would be a separate conversation off record. I mean, that would be, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it would not be part of the transaction. And sometimes people do that, you know, vacation homes, rentals, and Airbnbs. A lot of times they say, well, we want the property to the furniture to stay. And so then, yes, that would be through a bill of sale.
Okay.
But it would be a separate transaction.
Okay. At what point does it become a separate conversation, when it's not the appliances or something major like that?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
At which point, because you said that would be off record, but if it were the washer, dryer, refrigerator, stove, it's not off record. So
No,
that
it'd be part of the we would say that would be an inclusion in the contract.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. If we wanted the rug, it would still be an inclusion.
Yes. Right.
Okay.
Once we start getting into personal property, though, it has no value for the property for lending purposes. So we have, and we're going to talk more about that when we get into contracts.
Okay.
But yes. So if there's any type of inclusion, such as the washer, dryer, stove, refrigerator, freezer, whatever the case is, you know, wine cooler, all that. Once we start getting into furniture and all that, that is going to be separate between the buyer and the seller on the bill of sale.
Okay.
Okay, that answer your question?
Yes.
All right. So here's examples of personal property. We have a car, we have furniture. That's all going to be anything that's tangible. Money, personal property, money is considered personal property. Clothing. Okay, let's talk about emblements and appurtenances. Let's give an example of each. Who remembers what we talked about earlier? Emblements and appurtenances. So emblements are growing crops, okay? So this is going to be for test purposes also. Emblements are growing crops that are produced annually. Emblements are personal property even before the harvest. A landlord cannot lease property to a tenant farmer and then terminate the lease without giving the tenant the right to re-enter the land to harvest his or her crops. Crops grown on property prior to the sale are considered to be personal property of the seller. So let's talk about that. So we have a farm, and the farmer plants corn in May. Okay. Those are emblements. And then let's say we harvest the corn in September, okay? But in July, the owner sells the farm. Those emblements, those crops for that year are considered personal property for him or her. They have the right, well, they will have the right to come back and harvest that corn and take the proceed, the proceeds of the corn, the sale of the corn, the profits for that year, because that's considered personal property. The new owner, the new farmer, whoever bought that farm, does not have the right to those crops that year. Now, next year they have the land and they can do whatever they want. But that year, same thing if the landlord is leasing the farm, leasing the land, and the tenant farmer, plants their crops. And then for some reason, the owner terminates their lease in the middle of the season, the middle of July, August, and we're gonna pick the beans in October. Well, that tenant has the rights to those implements, to those growing crops for that year. And then we have what we call appurtenance, which is anything affixed, attached, or used with land for its benefit that is transferred with the land, such as land leases or easements. So when we sell a property and we have an easement, that easement does not go away. The easement gets transferred over to the new owner. So if we have an easement on a property and the owner has the ability, to go from one end to the other to get to the main road, and they have an easement through their neighbor's property, when he or she sells their home, that easement carries over to the new owner. That would be considered a appurtenance. Emblements go with the previous person for that current year. So make sure we understand what both those mean as far as definitions go and how they work, okay? So here would be an example. Implements, growing crops that are produced annually. They're considered personal property before they're even harvested. So there's a difference between plants in somebody's yard or garden and then crops, okay? So if property is transferred, that does not mean that people can go in and dig out all the rose bushes and the tulips and the maple tree and all that. But if there's a peach orchard or a vineyard, then they have rights to those that year. So let's talk about severance and annexation. Severance is the process to make real property into personal property, such as cutting down a tree for firewood. Annexation is the process of making personal property into real property through the process such as using the lumber to frame a basement. So severance means to take away. We have a bunch of trees on the property, and we're going to cut some of them down so we have firewood for the fireplace. It's winter, it's cold, and we need some firewood, so we're going to go out and cut some trees. That would be severance, to sever, to take away. Annexation means to add, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the process of making personal property. So we take perhaps maybe the wood that we took down from the trees, and now we're going to do something else. We're going to use the wood to frame the basement. We're going to build a deck. We're going to whatever. That's going to be considered, it's going to go into real property. It's going to be attached. It's going to be part of the property. Therefore, when we do attach, it becomes real property. And then we didn't cover this on the earlier, but so we have fixtures and we have trade fixtures. Can anybody tell the difference between what a fixture and what a trade fixture is and how they are handled different at the time of transfer of ownership?
A fixture is real property that was once personal property before they became affixed to the property in a permanent fashion. and examples of those are blinds, a chandelier, built-in bookshelves. Trade fixture is like for restaurants. If they are, I actually like the library example. The shelves in the library, if they ever sold that building, they would take those things with them instead of leave them.
Yep. So fixtures is real, you explained it very good. So fixtures is real property that was once personal property, and they became permanently fixed to so they're installed, they're connected. As soon as we connect something in the home, it is now considered a fixture and is part of the home. So if we put in ceiling fans, and once they're installed into the home, those are considered fixtures. They can't be, they're considered part of the house. So when the property transfers, they stay. You don't, like, I'm gonna take the toilets with me and the fixtures with me and the sinks and the faucets and everything else. It's permanently fixed to the home. It's considered real property now. So you don't, it's not considered personal property. It's part of the transfer with the deed. Okay. Then we have what we call trade fixtures. Trade fixtures are fixtures that are part of a business, and they're handled very, very different than a regular fixture. In fact, they're handled the complete opposite. So Michelle gave the example of the library. I give the example of the restaurant that, makes pizzas. Somebody comes in, they lease out a unit, or they buy a unit, and they have 3 large pizza ovens. Okay, and they have other fixtures in there for their pizza restaurant. And they're doing so well, they're so successful. They call you and they say, "Hey, I need to lease a bigger space. I am just bonkers here. I'm just doing crazy. My business is just, off the charts. I need to get, I need to probably double the size of my space that I have right now." And then you go through the process and you help them find it. When they move out, those fixtures are part of their business. Those fixtures get to go with them. They can take them with them. It's not considered real property. They're allowed to take it. You go into like a clothing store, right? And they have like shelves, filled with jeans and tops and whatever, accessories and all that. If that dress shop owner wanted to relocate and move out, they get to take all those fixtures with them. A coffee shop, everything's permanently fixed. They get to take all those fixtures with them when they leave if they want to. So regular fixtures stay. They are considered real property. Trade fixtures are not considered real property, and they can leave, they can depart, they can be taken out. Okay? So here's examples of trade fixtures. If you had that in the business, you would be able to take that with you. If it was built-in shelves in a home, they would stay there. You would not be ripping those out of the walls. They would stay there. They're part of the real property now in the house. Okay. Any other questions before we sign off?
No, sir.
How does everybody feel tonight so far? And it's a lot. We did a lot.
Yeah, this is gonna be something.
Beautiful. Now, how often do we come a week?
So my classes are every Monday and every Thursday from 6 to 9. Okay, so we covered 1 through 5 tonight. On Thursday, we're going to cover 6 through 10. So if you can go ahead and start studying 6 through 10, reading and preparing, because the idea is to read all the material prior to class and also take the quiz just to see how you did, and then come to class, and then we'll review this so that then you are familiar with this, and then it allows you to interact in class more. So if we ask questions, it kind of tests you to see like what you remembered, what you learned. And it also gives you the opportunity to ask questions if you're unsure or uncertain.
If we want to come like every day, are we able to come like to your class and also Joe's class?
Absolutely. And then when we're all done, you can repeat it again, because we will be doing this every, basically every 5 weeks, because we'll have 4 weeks of class and then a 5th week of review, and then we'll start all over again. Like we just finished this last session last Thursday, and now I just started again today. And you're allowed to review the classes in and out whenever you want. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
And as always, when you're studying and you're going through all the material, if you have any questions, just shoot me a text, email, whatever, and we'll get you the answer your questions or get you the help that you need. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Vincent.
All right. You guys all have a really great evening, great rest of the week, and look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Okay.
All right. You do the same.
Bye now.